The bell above the door of the Gilded Bean chimed a delicate, cheerful tune, a stark contrast to the grey, drizzling Tuesday afternoon outside. Sarah Jenkins, halfway through a double shift, barely registered the sound. It was just part of the cafe's symphony, the hiss of the espresso machine, the low murmur of conversations, the clinking of ceramic on saucer. She moved with a practiced economy, wiping down the marble countertop, her eyes scanning the room out of habit. She knew the regulars, the laptop warriors nursing a single latte for hours, the book club ladies who always argued about the bill, the young couple who held hands under the table, their eyes full of a future she sometimes envied. Then they walked in, and the entire atmosphere of the cafe seemed to shift, the pressure dropping just before a storm. The man was immaculate, his charcoal suit tailored so perfectly it seemed fused to his lean, predatory frame. His shoes shone with a merciless gloss, and a silver watch, a Patek Philippe from the looks of it, peeked from his cuff. He had the kind of sharp, chiseled features that magazine covers loved, but his eyes were cold, flat chips of granite. He held the door, not as a courtesy, but as a command for the woman behind him to enter. She was his opposite. Where he was sharp lines and cold steel, she was soft edges and faded elegance. An older woman, likely his mother, wrapped in a cashmere shawl the color of old lavender. Her hair was a cloud of silver, impeccably styled, but her face was etched with a profound weariness. She carried a vintage leather handbag, her knuckles white as she clutched the strap. She moved with a hesitant, fragile grace, as if afraid the floor might give way beneath her. "A table, in the back," the man Julian commanded, not looking at Sarah but past her as if she were a piece of furniture. His voice was low and smooth, but carried an undertone of impatience that made the hairs on Sarah's arms prickle. Sarah forced a professional smile. "Of course, sir. Right this way." She led them to a quiet corner booth, the plush velvet seats offering a semblance of privacy. He didn't help his mother with her coat, but instead slid into the booth and immediately pulled out his phone, his thumb beginning a frantic, silent dance across the screen. The woman Eleanor settled herself slowly, arranging her shawl around her shoulders. She looked small in the large booth, a ghost at a feast. "I'll have a black Americano, double shot," Julian said, his eyes still glued to his phone. "She'll have a chamomile tea, no sugar, no lemon. She doesn't need the excitement." He finished with a smirk so faint, so fleeting, that Sarah almost missed it. But she didn't. It was a sliver of ice in his otherwise perfect facade. Eleanor flinched, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement, and her gaze dropped to the polished surface of the table. She said nothing. "Right away," Sarah said, her smile feeling tight on her face. As she walked back to the counter, she couldn't shake the feeling of unease. It was more than just a wealthy son being dismissive of his mother. She'd seen that 100 times. This was different. There was a current of something dark and suffocating flowing between them, a silent, ugly tension that filled the space around their table like a poison gas. She prepared the drinks, her movements automatic, but her mind was back in the corner booth, watching the silent, unfolding drama. Sarah delivered the drinks, placing the steaming mug and the delicate teapot on the table. "Can I get you anything else?" she asked, her voice bright. Julian waved a dismissive hand, not even looking up from his phone. Eleanor, however, lifted her head. For a brief second her eyes met Sarah's, and what Sarah saw in them made her breath catch. It wasn't just sadness. It was a deep, hollowed-out fear, a desperate plea that was extinguished as quickly as it appeared. Eleanor immediately looked back down at her hands, which were trembling slightly in her lap. Sarah retreated, busying herself by clearing a nearby table, giving her a legitimate reason to stay within earshot. Julian finally put his phone down, placing it face up on the table beside him. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial, menacing whisper. "We need to talk about the papers, Mother," he began, the word mother sounding less like a term of endearment and more like a title he was stripping her of. "Mr. Abernathy has called me twice. He says you're stalling." Eleanor delicately poured her tea, her hand shaking so much that a little of the pale liquid sloshed onto the saucer. "Julian, I need more time to read them, to understand." Her voice was a fragile, papery thing. "Understand what?" he hissed, the silkiness gone, replaced by undisguised venom. It's simple. You sign the estate over to the conservatorship. I manage it. It protects you. It protects our legacy from your episodes. He gestured vaguely at her, a gesture of dismissal that encompassed her entire being. You know you're not as sharp as you used to be. The doctor agrees. Dr. Finch is your doctor, Julian. I've only met him twice, she whispered, staring into her teacup as if it held all the answers. He's the best. And he's concerned. As am I. Julian leaned back, feigning a look of paternal worry that was grotesquely out of place on his cold face. This is for your own good. We can't have you making rash decisions, giving away father's money to those ridiculous charities, or, God forbid, that second cousin of yours who crawls out of the woodwork every Christmas. He picked up his coffee and took a sip, his eyes never leaving her face. He was watching her, gauging her reaction, his predatory stillness more frightening than any shout. Eleanor's shoulders slumped. A single tear traced a path down her powdered cheek. She wiped it away quickly, furtively, as if ashamed of the display. It's not just money, Julian. It's my home. My life. It's my legacy, he snapped, his voice cracking like a whip. A man at the next table looked over, and Julian immediately composed himself, lowering his voice again. It is the legacy I am sworn to protect. A legacy you are actively endangering with your sentimentality and confusion. Sarah felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. Confusion. Episodes. This wasn't a son concerned for his mother's well-being. This was a predator isolating his prey, using medical language as a weapon. She watched as Eleanor reached for the small white packets of sugar in the ceramic holder, her fingers fumbling. She lined up 3 of them on the table. Then another 2. Her hands were shaking badly now. Julian glanced down. What are you doing? I told you, no sugar. Just keeping my hands busy, Eleanor murmured. She didn't look at him. She looked past him, her gaze sweeping the room until it landed for a fraction of a second on Sarah. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. She watched, transfixed, as Eleanor's trembling finger nudged the packets. 3 packets in a row, a small gap, then 2 packets. It was nothing. It was just fiddling. But then Eleanor subtly, almost invisibly, tapped the table. 3 short taps. A pause. 2 short taps. She repeated it. Tap, tap, tap. Tap, tap. It was a code. Sarah didn't know how she knew, but she did. It wasn't Morse code for SOS. It was something else. Her mind raced, sifting through half-remembered posters in public restrooms, safety seminars. And then it hit her, a jolt like an electric shock. A domestic abuse signal she'd seen on a social media campaign. A signal for dialing the emergency number, 911, 3 numbers. But this was just 2 sets of taps. Eleanor saw the flicker of confusion and then dawning realization in Sarah's eyes. Her own gaze flickered down to her teacup, then to the side, then back to the cup. A new signal. She was drawing a shape in the condensation on the table with her finger. A square. A house. Then, with her other hand, she pulled back the cuff of her lavender sleeve. Just an inch. Just for a second. Against the pale, fragile skin of her inner wrist was a dark, ugly bruise in the distinct shape of fingers. The world seemed to fall away. The hiss of the espresso machine, the chatter, the rain outside, it all faded into a dull roar. All Sarah could see was that bruise and the terrified, pleading eyes of the woman who had, in the silent language of the desperate, just screamed for help. A wave of nausea washed over Sarah. Her hands felt clammy, her throat tight. For a moment, she was frozen, rooted to the spot behind the pastry display. You're imagining it. It's a family squabble. Don't get involved. Mind your own business. The voice of self-preservation was loud, insistent. Getting involved meant trouble. It meant facing that man, Julian, whose wealth could likely crush a person like her without a second thought. She could lose her job. But then the image of the bruise flashed in her mind again, stark and violet against that paper-thin skin. She remembered a girl from her high school, Amy, who always wore long sleeves. Everyone had known something was wrong, but no one had done anything. The guilt of her own inaction had lingered for years, a small, hard stone in her gut. She would not make that mistake again. Her decision solidified, hardening from a panicked impulse into a cold, clear resolve. She had to be smart. She caught Mark's eye as he came out of the stockroom. "Mark, I'm feeling a little unwell. Stomach cramps. Do you mind if I take 5 in the back?" Mark, a perpetually stressed man, just grunted. "Fine, but be quick. The 3 o'clock slump is about to hit." Sarah nodded, her face a mask of calm she did not feel. She walked toward the staff-only door. Once in the narrow corridor that led to the break room, she pulled her cell phone from her apron pocket. Her fingers were trembling so badly she had to try twice to unlock it. She took a deep, shaky breath and dialed 911. "911, what is your emergency?" Sarah pressed the phone hard against her ear, her voice a hushed, urgent stream. "My name is Sarah Jenkins. I'm at the Gilded Bean Cafe on 14th and Elm. I need a wellness check." Quietly. "There's a woman here with her son, and I believe she is in danger." She recounted everything, the controlling behavior, the papers, the bruise, the desperate signals. "He's trying to get her to sign something, talking about her being confused. It feels predatory." "Okay, Sarah, we're dispatching officers. We'll ask them to be discreet." "Please, just hurry," Sarah breathed before hanging up. She had to get back out there. She had done it. There was no going back. Taking one more steadying breath, she pushed open the door and walked back into the quiet storm. The next 10 minutes were the longest of Sarah's life. Julian had produced a thick sheaf of papers from a sleek leather briefcase and placed them on the table. He was pointing at a line at the bottom, a pen held expectantly in his hand. Eleanor just stared at the papers, a prisoner on the verge of signing a confession. Then the bell chimed again. 2 uniformed police officers stepped inside, a man and a woman. They were calm, their presence authoritative, but not aggressive. Sarah, standing by the espresso machine, gave a nearly imperceptible nod in their direction. The female officer, whose name tag read Davis, met her eyes for a split second and gave a slight dip of her chin in acknowledgement. They moved with a deliberate slowness that seemed to suck the air out of the room. Julian saw them coming, a flash of pure fury crossing his face before he masked it with annoyance. "Can I help you, officers?" he asked, his voice dripping with condescension. Officer Davis spoke, her tone polite but firm. "Sir, we received a call requesting a wellness check. We just need to have a brief word with the lady you're with." Julian let out a short, incredulous laugh. "A wellness check? You must be joking." "There's been a mistake." He turned his glare on Sarah. "I imagine one of your staff is bored and looking for some drama." Eleanor shrank further into the booth, her entire body trembling. "Sir, we'll just be a moment," the male officer Miller said. "Ma'am, are you all right?" "She is perfectly fine," Julian cut in, his voice rising. "Now, unless you have a warrant, I suggest you leave before I call my lawyer and have your badges." But Officer Davis ignored him, kneeling slightly to bring herself to eye level with Eleanor. "My name is Officer Davis," she said gently. "We're here to help. Is there anything you want to tell us?" Julian stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly. "This is harassment. I am Julian Croft, CEO of Croft Enterprises, and we are leaving." He reached for Eleanor's arm. "Sir, I need you to sit down," Officer Miller said, his voice now carrying a hard edge of command. It was the touch that did it. As Julian's fingers closed around Eleanor's upper arm, she let out a small, terrified gasp. In that moment, something inside her broke. All the years of fear and silent suffering coalesced into a single spark of defiance. Her eyes, wet with tears, lifted to meet Officer Davis's kind gaze. Her lips trembled as she formed the word, her voice barely a whisper, but in the sudden silence of the cafe, it sounded like a gunshot. "Help!" Julian's face went pale, then purpled with rage. "Mother, what are you doing? Tell them you're confused." But Eleanor shook her head, a slow, deliberate movement. "No," she said, her voice a little stronger. "He won't let me leave the house. He took my phone. He wants me to sign these papers." She gestured a trembling hand toward the documents. "He says they're to protect me. But they're not. They're to take everything." The cafe was utterly silent. Sarah felt a profound, aching relief wash over her. She had been right. The dam of Eleanor's silence, once breached, gave way to a flood. It started after my husband passed away, she whispered, her gaze fixed on the officer's face. He hired new staff, loyal to him. He brought in his own doctor, Dr. Finch. He prescribed me new medication, pills that made me feel foggy. He told me I was having episodes, that I was confused. I think he was drugging me. The twist was more monstrous than Sarah had imagined. It was a calculated campaign of psychological torture. "These papers," Eleanor said, her voice trembling with rage, "they declare me mentally incompetent. He told me if I didn't sign them today, he would have Dr. Finch commit me to a private facility." "Mr. Croft," Officer Miller said, stepping forward, "I'm going to have to ask you to come with us." "On what grounds?" Julian snarled. "On the ramblings of a confused old woman? You have no proof." "Ma'am," Officer Davis said gently, "is there any way you can prove what you're saying?" Eleanor's hand went to the vintage leather handbag beside her. I kept a journal," she said, pulling out a small navy blue leather-bound book. "I wrote down everything, dates, times, what he said, how the pills made me feel. He doesn't know about this." She held it out to Officer Davis, a tangible piece of her truth. "And the bruise?" Officer Miller asked. Eleanor looked at her son, her eyes filled with a profound sorrow. "He was angry this morning. I told him I wouldn't come with him. He grabbed me. He told me I had no choice." The picture was complete. Julian Croft, the celebrated philanthropist, was a monster. Officer Miller stepped up to Julian. "Julian Croft, you're being detained for questioning regarding allegations of elder abuse, unlawful confinement, and coercion." He took Julian's arm. The fight had gone out of him, replaced by a chilling stillness. As they led him past the tables, his eyes found Sarah's. The look he gave her wasn't one of anger. It was a promise of retribution. But Sarah held his gaze, refusing to look away. For the first time all afternoon, she wasn't afraid. As the patrol cars pulled away, one with a shaken but resolute Eleanor and the other with her monstrous son, a hush fell over the cafe. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Julian, out on a staggering bail within hours, unleashed the full might of his fortune. A slick PR firm flooded the media with a narrative of a loving son, heartbroken by his mother's descent into dementia, manipulated by a fame-hungry waitress. A multi-million-dollar lawsuit for defamation landed on the doorstep of the Gilded Bean, naming both the cafe and Sarah Jenkins personally. Mark, the owner, was ashen-faced. "Sarah, they're going to destroy me. My life savings are in this place. His lawyers, they're sharks. They're saying you have a history of making false accusations. They're digging into your past," he cried, waving a printout from a gossip blog. The headline screamed, "Cafe Crusader or Compulsive Liar." A knot of ice formed in her stomach. That evening, Sarah sat in the book-lined study of Evelyn Gable, the retired attorney from the cafe, a regular from the book club who had quietly passed Sarah her card before the police left. "This is the playbook, Sarah," Evelyn said, her voice crisp and reassuring as she poured them both tea. "Isolate and discredit the witness. They will try to break you. Julian has demanded an expedited hearing for a restraining order against you. He wants to publicly brand you as a harasser before his own criminal trial begins. He's arrogant. He believes his money makes him untouchable. We're going to use his own weapon, his own arrogance, against him." The courtroom was a media circus. Julian Croft sat at the plaintiff's table, looking every bit the aggrieved son, his face a perfect mask of dignified sorrow. He was dressed not in a power suit, but in a soft grey cashmere sweater, a calculated costume of concern. Sarah sat beside Evelyn, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs, the flashes of cameras feeling like physical blows. Julian took the stand, his voice a smooth, persuasive melody of grief. He spoke of his undying love for his mother, his sleepless nights worrying for her health. He painted a picture of a woman fading into the fog of dementia, lashing out at the very person trying to save her. Then he turned his attention to Sarah. "This woman," he said, his voice cracking with feigned emotion, "she saw an opportunity. She saw a wealthy family in crisis and decided to insert herself. She has a history of emotional instability, of fabricating stories for attention. She preyed on my mother's confusion, whispering poison, orchestrating this shakedown, to destroy my reputation for her own 15 minutes of fame. Then it was Evelyn's turn. She rose, her movements measured, her presence filling the room with a quiet, formidable authority. She approached the witness stand, her eyes locking onto Julian's. "Mr. Croft," she began, her voice deceptively mild, "a very moving performance. You claim your mother is confused, yet you've spent the last year managing her vast and complex portfolio. You consider yourself a prudent investor, correct?" "I do my best to protect my family's legacy," Julian replied, puffing out his chest slightly. "A legacy built on transparency, I assume? You pride yourself on that?" "Of course." "Excellent," Evelyn said with a thin smile. "Let's talk about something specific. Do you recall a conversation on October 12th about your investment in an Argentinian solar panel company, Solara?" A flicker of surprise, then cold annoyance, crossed Julian's face. "I don't recall the specific date. My mother's financial affairs are complex." "Are they?" Evelyn pressed, her voice gaining a sharp edge. "Because my information, sourced directly from your mother's now restored financial records, says you lost over $8 million of her personal funds when that company went bankrupt. Did you inform her of that loss, Mr. Croft? Or did you tell her the money had simply been moved to a more secure bond fund? An episode of confusion would be quite convenient then, wouldn't it?" Julian's jaw tightened, a muscle pulsing in his cheek. "My financial decisions are not on trial here." "Oh, I believe they are," Evelyn countered, her voice hardening. "They speak to a pattern of deceit, a pattern of isolating your mother and controlling her assets to cover your own catastrophic business failures." She turned a page on her legal pad. "Now let's talk about Dr. Finch. You testified under oath that you sought out the very best geriatric specialist for your mother. A doctor with an impeccable record, I believe you said. He came highly recommended. By whom, Mr. Croft? Because are you aware that his medical license was suspended for 2 years in Nevada for overprescribing opioids to elderly patients, resulting in 1 documented death?" The color drained from Julian's face. The reporters were scribbling furiously. "This is irrelevant and inflammatory," Julian's lawyer objected, leaping to his feet. "It goes directly to the heart of his credibility, Your Honor," Evelyn shot back, her voice ringing with indignation. "He didn't find a doctor to care for his mother, he found a puppet with a prescription pad to drug her into submission." The judge's face was grim. "Objection overruled. Mr. Croft, answer the question." Julian swallowed hard, the sound audible in the tense silence. "I was not aware of the full extent of his history." "Of course you weren't," Evelyn said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. She paused, letting the silence hang in the air before moving in for the kill. "Mr. Croft, you testified that at the cafe you never once touched your mother in an aggressive manner, that you maintained a respectful distance across the table at all times. Is that correct?" "Absolutely," Julian said, regaining a sliver of his composure. He looked at the jury, attempting to project wounded innocence. "I would never, ever lay a hand on my mother. The very suggestion is obscene. So to be clear, under oath, you are stating that you did not reach across that table, you did not grab her arm, and you did not physically intimidate her in any way." "That is correct. It is a complete and utter fantasy concocted by this girl," he said, gesturing contemptuously toward Sarah. "Thank you, Mr. Croft. No further questions for now." Evelyn returned to her seat. The defense called Sarah Jenkins to the stand. A murmur rippled through the room. Sarah's hands were slick with sweat as she walked to the stand. Julian watched her with a look of utter disdain. This was his turf, his world of power and influence. A barista was nothing. Evelyn approached. "Miss Jenkins, you were a student at the Art Institute before you began working at the cafe, correct?" "Yes, for 2 years. I studied life drawing and portraiture." "So you have a trained eye for detail. For posture, for the tension in a hand, the specific angle of a body leaning forward." "Objection, Your Honor. Where is this going?" Julian's lawyer barked. "I'm establishing the credibility of my witness's observational skills. It is highly relevant." "Overruled," the judge stated flatly. "Miss Jenkins," Evelyn continued, "please describe the scene at the booth, exactly as you remember it." Sarah took a deep breath, closed her eyes for a second, and the entire tableau bloomed in her mind, vivid and clear. He sat slumped at first, on his phone. When he put it down, he leaned forward, elbows on the table. The light from the window caught the beveled edge of his watch. It was a Patek Philippe Calatrava, reference 5027. The second hand was a thin sliver of blue steel. His tie had a subtle herringbone pattern, grey on charcoal. He slid the papers toward his mother. When she hesitated, his posture changed. He straightened up, his voice dropped. Then, Sarah's voice was steady, precise. He reached across the table with his right hand. He didn't grab her arm. He slammed his hand down on the papers right next to her hand to startle her. His fingers were splayed, the knuckles white, the skin over them stretched thin, almost translucent. And then he pointed at the signature line. His index finger was less than an inch from her thumb. Julian scoffed audibly. A fanciful story. She's an artist, all right. She invents things. Does she? Evelyn asked the heir. She turned to the judge. Your Honor, that night my client, reeling from what she had witnessed, did what an artist does. She sketched the scene from memory to process it. We would like to enter into evidence Defense Exhibit A, a charcoal drawing of that moment. An officer delivered the sketch. It was projected on the screen. It was raw, emotional, but anatomically perfect. Capturing the aggressive forward lean of Julian's body, the tension in his hand, the gleam of the watch, exactly as Sarah had described. Julian's lawyer was on his feet. This is a joke, a drawing? This proves nothing. On its own, perhaps not, Evelyn conceded smoothly. But you see, Mr. Croft, you made a very specific claim. That you never reached across the table, but a barista's memory is a funny thing. They remember details, and sometimes so do other patrons. Evelyn gestured to the back of the courtroom. A young woman with bright pink hair stood up. It was Clara, Eleanor's second cousin, the one Julian had so dismissively mentioned. This is Clara Bellwether, Mr. Croft, a freelance photojournalist. Eleanor had asked her to be there that day, just in case. She was sitting at the table by the window, providing silent support for her aunt. Your Honor, I'd like to submit into evidence Defense Exhibit B. Another officer delivered a photograph to the judge, and it replaced the sketch on the screen. It was a crystal-clear, high-resolution shot taken from a low angle. It was a mirror image of Sarah's drawing. It showed the table, the papers, Eleanor's trembling hand, and Julian's hand slammed down beside it, his Patek Philippe watch gleaming, his index finger jabbing aggressively toward the signature line. He was caught, not in an act of battery, but in an act of intimidation, and more importantly, in a bald-faced, undeniable lie under oath. A wave of camera flashes erupted from the press gallery. Julian's face, projected on the screen next to the photograph of his lie, was a mask of disbelief turning to pure, unadulterated fury. He had been so focused on the big picture, on controlling the narrative, that he had never even noticed the girl with the pink hair. And now, Your Honor, Evelyn's voice boomed in the suddenly silent room, for the matter of Mr. Croft's supposed gentle persuasion that morning. The courtroom doors opened. Eleanor Croft walked in, flanked by Officer Davis. She was no longer the frail, terrified woman from the cafe. She stood tall, her eyes clear and full of fire. In her hand, she held a small digital audio recorder. This is a recording Eleanor made that morning, Your Honor, Evelyn announced. A small habit she picked up after she realized her memory was being deliberately compromised by the medication Dr. Finch was prescribing. A medication, I might add, that our lab has confirmed is a powerful sedative not approved for her condition. Evelyn pressed play. Julian's voice, no longer smooth but sharp and venomous, filled the silent room. You will sign these papers today, Mother, or I swear to God, you will spend the rest of your miserable life in a padded room where no one will ever hear from you again. You have no choice. The sound of a scuffle and Eleanor's small cry of pain was unmistakable. A collective gasp went through the courtroom. Julian Croft sat frozen at his table, his perfect facade utterly shattered. The mask was gone, and the monster was laid bare for the world to see. Perjury, coercion, abuse. His public execution was complete, carried out not by a single act, but by the combined courage of 3 women and the blinding arrogance of a man who believed he was too powerful to fall. Weeks later, the Gilded Bean was bustling. It was famous now, the place where the giant fell. Sarah was wiping down the counter when the bell chimed. In walked Eleanor and Evelyn, their faces bright with victory. "Your last shift, I hear," Eleanor said, her smile genuine and warm. "Yes, I'm thinking of going back to art school," Sarah replied, a new confidence in her voice. "We have a better idea," Evelyn said, sliding a thick, glossy brochure across the counter. The title read, "The Gilded Heart Foundation." Eleanor has endowed a new non-profit, dedicated to providing legal aid and support for victims of silent abuse, the kind that happens behind the closed doors of wealth and power. Sarah looked at the brochure, then at the two women. "That's amazing." "We have a board of directors," Eleanor said, her eyes twinkling, "a lawyer, a financial planner, and a community outreach director. But we have an opening for a head of investigations." Sarah looked confused. "Me? But I'm a barista." "No," Eleanor corrected her gently. "You are a woman who sees things others miss. You see the tremor in a hand, the fear in an eye, the story told by a row of sugar packets. You see the world in a way others don't, and you have the courage to capture it. That's a talent far rarer and more valuable than a law degree. We don't need another lawyer, Sarah. We need your eyes. We need your heart." Sarah looked from Eleanor's hopeful face to Evelyn's proud nod. She looked at her own reflection in the polished chrome of the espresso machine. The tired, uncertain girl from a few weeks ago was gone. In her place was a woman who had faced down a monster and won. She picked up the brochure, her fingers tracing the golden logo. "Okay," she said, a slow, brilliant smile spreading across her face. "When do I start?"